This episode presents a special conversation with my F1 pal, Blake Buettner. As the 2025 season fast approaches, Blake and I discuss the new liveries which were revealed this week in a manner unlike any year prior, from no less than the O2 Arena in London, where all teams were present and the seats were full. Blake and I intend on bringing more F1 chat to you this season, so keep an eye out for these special episodes. So I guess I should say I'm your co-host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard Age Podcast.
Wesley Smith, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining me here on this special episode of the podcast to talk about the upcoming F1 season. It's good to see you, my friend.
Blake, my man. Yeah, absolutely. Excited for the season to kick off. I think it's a little under 4 weeks, right?
A week or two away from the practice in Bahrain that's about to kick off. I think that's right towards the end of the month on the 26th, 25th, 24th, I think that weekend. So, but we're recording this because it was just a day after all of the liveries were officially revealed in an event in London, F1 Live 75, I think it was called. And all of the cars were brought out with the drivers. So usually the teams, I feel like in the past, have kind of spread this out over the course of a week or two, and they kind of release them in their own way. So this time it was, I believe, mandated that they had to wait and reveal all their liveries together at this event. Wesley, this was quite the production that they put on.
Yeah, I mean, it was at the O2 of all places. And for those listening that don't know what that is, imagine a massive arena, like bigger than Madison Square Garden. I mean, it's a football stadium, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, 80,000 people or something, 100,000 people that it seats.
Yeah, it's huge. I feel like they do all kinds of events in there, and much bigger than Madison Square Garden, but maybe not quite as big as, like, I don't know, like a Big Ten football stadium, like Michigan's or something.
Yeah,
or
I was
Ohio
gonna
State
say,
at
is
Shoe
it
or
the big
something.
house? Yeah, yeah.
But plenty big, and man, they pulled out of all the stops. They had all the kind of like, I mean, it was like distinctly like English in personality, like the personalities that they had there, some of whom I wasn't like entirely familiar with, or like I only heard of like in passing. This Jack Whitehall that was the host, and then they had all these
comedian.
musicians, comedian, and he did a little like, kind of like roasting through, like it was kind of like an Oscars style type situation.
Totally. Yeah,
Right.
I thought he was really funny actually, and obviously he's an F1 fan. He must be, right? And I don't know like what kind of background he's got in that arena, and or how many times he's down on the grid potentially, or if he's tight with, Will Buxton. I mean, who knows,
Yes. Well, I'm glad you said that name, because Will Buxton is now out of the F1 scene. So that's one face. If you subscribe to F1 TV, that you would see with Laura Winter and Lawrence Barretto and all the guys there. And he would kind of provide the color commentary from time to time, I feel like, but it seemed like it had felt like the last couple of seasons that he was just kind of like out of it a little bit, at least like to me, because he'd been around F1 for like a long time. So
ages.
yeah, so now he's going over to like the IndyCar series, I believe that he'll be doing stuff there. So no Will Buxton, but this is, this guy, they had all those F1 TV personalities there, Laura Winter, Lawrence Barretto, and the guy that was hosting, and they kind of added their commentary throughout the night. Martin Brundle, of course, was there, and he's the guy that you would see on on other broadcasting outlets as well. So it's kind of a nice mixture of like everybody that was in there, along with people like Idris Elba, I think I saw, and Gordon Ramsay, and people like that. So, it was interesting because, I mean, it was certainly like a spectacle to get caught up in, and for them to release these cars. You get the sense of, from like the old school guys that it was kind of like, what is going on? This should just be about racing.
Right.
This is way too fancy. And of course, like Max Verstappen types and all that kind of stuff, which they kind of like gave him some trouble for throughout the thing. But it definitely seems like the direction that they're trying to go with F1, like as a sport, to kind of make it this like bigger spectacle that has like more of this global appeal. And this kind of just is like raising the stakes on it all, with this kind of like show style thing. Do you think it was effective?
Totally.
Like, did you like it as like just a piece of entertainment? And how did you feel about it as like an F1 fan?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just leading up to it, I guess I had gotten the notification email or whatever it was for the event itself, and I guess I just didn't realize it was at the O2.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't realize what I was about to be watching, frankly. And I know that may sound silly, but I genuinely didn't know. And when I tuned in, I was like, oh man, this thing's like huge. And then when they started to do it, they didn't like pan to the audience or anything. So you're like, okay, are they just hosting it here because the staging is so large? Are there people like actually in the seats, And turns out it was. So it was exactly kind of how you described as being somewhat of an Oscars type of event.
Yeah.
None of this I was privy to, frankly. And not that I was deflated by it. It was almost, I think it was almost better, I think, just due to the fact that, like, rather than removing a bed sheet, reveal the livery,
Yeah.
it it was far more of a spectacle. Some of it was a little bit overt.
I thought some of the
Some of the
musical
movies,
numbers like went
yeah,
a little long.
the band thing I wasn't really into. And full disclosure, I had to run an errand towards the beginning of the show,
Yeah.
so it was playing in my car's speakers, and then I had like, I don't condone this, or I don't promote this behavior, but I had it in my car on the video, right? So
Sure.
I wasn't exactly watching, but I was sort of watching at stoplights and stuff. And I was like, is this Machine Gun Kelly? I was like,
Yeah, yes. So that was it was yeah, they had all these kind of things going on. Yeah, I actually I had something going, so I started watching it a half an hour after it started. So which actually
okay,
was perfect because I could kind of like fast forward 10 seconds, fast forward 10 seconds. Okay.
totally.
And get to the good stuff, which of course was the car reveals and the livery. So normally, as I mentioned, this is kind of like staggered over the course of like a couple of weeks. It's kind of hard to keep track of all the
Hmm.
dates, and some of the teams, it's kind of like, some people. They don't get quite the exposure I think that
Right.
they would otherwise like. So I think it's good for them, for like the stakes of the world, right? To get the kind of exposure right alongside the Mercedes and McLarens and the Red Bull and all that kind of stuff. So I think
Yeah.
that's a nice thing, and it was nice to kind of have it all condensed into one thing to where you can kind of see everything. I will say though that I guess I have a couple of thoughts about these reveals, and the first is usually that we're not seeing the car that's going to be actually racing that season. You're seeing kind of like a dummy generic car that's just showcasing the livery that they plan to run
Right.
on the car. So you're not getting any real sense of like, oh wow, that's like a totally new front wing, or can you believe they did that with the
Right. The
side pod, or
sculpture.
whatever it is, right? Like we won't see much of that stuff until Bahrain testing in a couple of weeks. But I guess there was an exception this year, and that was the Ferrari car, which to my understanding is pretty much like the car that we'll see in Bahrain in testing. So I've seen a few kind of breakdowns already of people kind of picking apart the differences in the wing angle and the shape of the opening into the inlets and all that kind of stuff, which is really interesting, I think, and I wish we'd see kind of more of that kind of stuff from the teams. But also, these cars are meant to kind of like live and evolve throughout the season, as we see all the time. The cars that we see in testing and into the first few races of the season are oftentimes drastically different than the car that we see at the very end of the season or towards the end of the season, and that is like by design, right? Because unlike a game like football or baseball, where the field is like highly regulated, like the distance between the bases and the first down, all that kind of stuff, every single track is different, which mandates very different like aerodynamic packages throughout the season. So
Hmm.
it's I can imagine how tricky this must be for the engineers that work at some of these teams to try and think about, well, how many different like aerodynamic packages are we going to need to cover like all these different tracks. I guess maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. We can focus on the liveries, but I think it's important to keep in mind what you're seeing is just that. It's the liveries.
Yeah. And
So
I think it's important to note, too, that the debate as to which aerodynamic package to release when also, I mean, it's just kind of like, oh, well, what if they find out that it's actually cornering better on idea number two
yeah,
rather than idea number one, and it's
yeah,
tricky.
yeah. I
It's a
think
moving target.
That's why the testing I think is so important for them because they've got all this like
Hmm.
data from like simulation and wind tunnels that they need to correlate with like real world stuff.
Right.
This was unfortunately like the mess that Mercedes got themselves in the transition into the new regulations in 2022. They had a very unusual design with the you remember with the no side pods or anything.
Hmm.
And according to their data, this was going to be like the magic bullet, like it was going to be miles ahead. But there was something missing that they couldn't account for that they saw in real life testing that was not in like the simulation. So they could just never get
Hmm.
it to correlate. And then of course they ended up abandoning the concept altogether. And then like a year later, it came out that Adrian Newey and like Red Bull people were like, yeah, we had found that that shape would have been the most efficient as well, but we couldn't figure out a way to make it actually work either. So we didn't even bring it to the to the track. So, it's just interesting to think about how all these teams, like the ideas that they have, like they can't get too radical because they still have to kind of correlate the data to the real world stuff. And they already know generally with this aerodynamic, regulations, like how things are going to be. So I think it's more of kind of the case of like, we're going to make all these changes XYZ that we thought would work last season and then we're going to evolve from there throughout like this season because they'll have the budget for all
Hmm.
the new parts and all that kind of stuff. So it's really
Yeah.
fascinating, I think, and to compare the cars from the beginning of the season to the end is like really interesting and things that they thought would work. Like McLaren, it seemed like every update that they brought worked. Aston Martin, it seemed like every update that they brought didn't work. It's kind of one of these things like, well, you hope it works, and then if they bring a new update package one week and it like doesn't work the way that they thought, like how far back in the path do they have to go to kind of like fix it? I don't know. It's a whole like that's kind of what makes the sport interesting, I guess, a little bit in my eyes,
Yeah. Yeah. No
and
kidding.
why it makes it like more than just the drivers, right? There's
Yeah.
a lot of this like brilliant stuff going on. Again, maybe getting too far ahead of myself. Back to these liveries, which is of course what the cars look like as they get out on track.
Yeah, and I think rather. I mean, we could go through all 10 if you really wanted to. I think it's maybe a better idea just to maybe point out our favorites, and then
Yes.
keep it a little concise.
Yes.
If I may, if I can start. I mean, I think the Visa livery looks incredible. I mean, as lame as I think Visa is as a sponsor, uh, I still think the car looks incredible.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best liveries for several years, and actually, I think Yuki even said that it's the best livery he's ever seen in his life, which I thought was, I mean, that's great because he's going to be driving it. But he's not wrong. I mean, it's a great looking car.
It absolutely is. And I mentioned there was a couple things that I thought about the liveries in general. Year to year, they don't really change that much.
Right,
This
right.
one is a departure, which I really appreciated. And,
Hmm.
and I think they still have like the branding problem of what people call them. They had their whole video was about what do you call the team? V Carb, Visa Cash App, Racing Bulls. You just call them Visa for shorthand, whatever you want to call them. I loved this livery, and it was my favorite of the night.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned it before when we've talked about some of these in the past. Turkey 2021, the Red Bull car. Had this special white livery, which looked just fantastic.
Yeah.
There's something about white when it works well, and then their association with Honda and white in my mind are just like go together really really well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. White
Um,
car, red logo kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. So I was like really
Yeah.
happy to see this one, and I'm glad that that at least somebody kind of took a bigger chance of like totally
It's very
changing it up.
Civic Type R. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
of course. Yes, the Civic Type R, the Integra Type R. These were cars kind of like back in the day, the legendary cars that you and I think of. I think when we think of it, only came in in white, yellow, and black.
Hmm.
And then they would kind of like layer in different colors in the more modern generations. But the white was always like that's the color that I associated with those
Yeah.
with those cars.
Yeah.
It's like a
Very
distinctly
90s as
Japanese
well.
color.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad that we're definitely on the same page there. My only hesitation with it, and maybe it'll look cool in person, are the it's kind of like how the bowls come out of the back half and into the white, so to make like a transition from the back half of
Mm,
the car to the white portion of the car. It's kind of like
right.
these big bowls coming out of it, and then they get like slightly smaller as they go on. A part of
Yeah.
me feels like it would have looked cleaner if they would have just cut it off and just made it white right from the get-go because the Honda logo's right
Hmm.
there, and then you've got that red bowl kind of on the air intake. Um, but overall, a super super sharp
Well, and
livery
it's
here.
got the photo I pulled up here just alongside it. It's got some like flecks, or I can't remember. Are they stars or something? I can't remember because this photo is really small. But right in front of the rear wheels, there's like that darker color back there. And
Yeah.
then it almost kind of looks like the bull might be running and kicking up dust. You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wonder what the huh. Yeah,
I don't
it
know if
might
that
be.
was,
Maybe that was the idea then. Yeah, because that's
I don't know.
that's
I
like
mean,
that's the
maybe
area
it's
I'm
just a
talking about.
coincidence. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I thought that was kind of cool. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I do
but
like that.
I tell you, some of these cars are just very derivative, as to be somewhat expected, I guess. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I the Haas. What do you think of the Haas car? Because as a guy who loves red, black, and white together, you think of Chicago Bulls. You think of um, I'm trying to think of what else is red, black, and white now. But Chicago, because I was such a Jordan fan as a kid, like that's what I always equate it to.
Sure.
And I mean, Haas is already, they've always been red, black, and white, or mostly black with some white and red splashed. I thought it was cool. I mean, I like the huge Haas on the side. I mean, that is the team, which begs the question. I mean, why doesn't or why don't Ferrari and Mercedes have their names more prominent on the car? Like,
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, yeah, Haas is like
I mean, Ferrari's just like the little tiny emblem on the nose cone, and that's it.
even when you see their logo like on the promotional materials, it's like with HP is like right next to it. Like it gets equal branding. I can
I
imagine.
think the HP looks awful,
And the
personally.
HP, it's not even. I feel like it wasn't even their newest logo. I thought they had kind of a more like just bar like logo. Uh,
I mean, I think it's fair to say that whoever spends the most money has probably the most prominent logo. I mean, that to me does make sense. But considering these cars, I think it would be really cool. Considering this team is called Ferrari, is called Haas, is called Mercedes, or I guess it's AMG Petronas, but like, do you get what I'm saying? I think it would be cool if there was like a mandate where like the team name has to be prominent on the car, because I just think it's kind of cool. It's like again, to throw it back to a Chicago Bulls, like a jersey. It says Bulls across the chest.
you're right. There's no other car that really has like the
They
brand
never
name
do.
of the thing right
Yeah,
there. And
and that's what
Haas,
I wanted to talk to you
Haas
about.
is right
Yeah.
there. Interesting. Yeah, I guess. And they've been around a while. So to me, like this car, I generally like uh the delivery here. The MoneyGram thing, I'm not so sure. Like I know they have no real like it's a sponsor, like it is what it is. But something about like MoneyGram makes it like kind of cheapens it just slightly.
Well, yeah, I kind of feel like if you're starting a company, now I don't even know what MoneyGram does. I think it's fair to say, I don't know, is it sending money to other
It's
people, like
gotta
kind of
be.
like an ACH transfer? But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's got to be something like that. Like, can you Venmo me or MoneyGram me? I don't know what it is, but also if I were starting that company, I don't think I would have named it MoneyGram. Like, it just, where do you work? I work for MoneyGram.
MoneyGram.
Like,
Yeah.
it's an awful name.
It's look, it's not like, these other ones are like huge blue chip like oil
Yeah.
companies like like
Mm-hmm.
Petronas and Aramco
Mm-hmm.
and BWT. I think they do water purification or something like that on like a global scale. And then MoneyGram. It kind of goes with maybe like the sense of the team though. It's kind of like a scrappy underdog. I don't know, but to me,
Yeah.
like this livery reminded me of the Toyota, who is I think a strategic partner of theirs. The
Mm.
Toyota's like endurance racing, like LMP1 cars, um,
Okay.
from years past, which had kind of like black, red, and white in like a really cool way.
Well, I mean, on that front, I mean, if we're speaking of like WEC or anything, like it's kind of an Audi livery as well.
Yeah,
Like
it's
a.
got shades of that for sure, which is ironic given that the kick will of course become Audi
Hmm.
next year. That the kick has the probably the most distinctive looking livery of all of them, given the bright green. I mean, it's like acid green, man. you know,
The steak,
there.
is
Yeah,
that
the
it?
steak. Yeah, the
The
Kick Sauber
yeah,
steak. Yeah, what's going on with that?
yeah,
What is that? Kick Sauber, and then steak is the sponsor. See, I just did it
yeah.
again. I confused the two, the two of them. Um, but it's I feel like maybe they kind of evened out their livery with like more solid green in the front and kind of solid black in the back. Um, but there's I think
Yeah, not a very inventive kind of livery, I would say. It looks like somebody just kind of spray painted it, faded it to black, and then just stuck a bunch of stickers on. Whereas, like, again,
yeah.
you go and look at the V carb car, like that, somebody gave a lot of thought to that, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. What do you think? So you mentioned the HP logo. Um, which
Yeah,
of
the
course
Ferrari car,
features prominently in like kind of which is a new component for this year's for the Ferrari livery this year is kind of like a white diagonal that goes up over the air intake,
hmm
with just the HP logo in it. Like I feel like it's a way to kind of like highlight the logo there. It would have been cool maybe if it was also done in the same like darker red to kind of keep it, but the blue is there. It's Hewlett Packard if I'm not mistaken, and then there's
it
IBM on the
is.
back of the wing. So it's got these blue elements that go in there with this kind of, which with this new darker red for the Ferrari. Overall, I think it's a sharp car. But like you said, I'm wondering if maybe a different HP logo would have worked better on it.
I mean, that is HP's colors. I understand, blue and white. But
Yeah.
on the same note, when you're applying that to a car like this, I don't know. I mean, I get the little white stripe behind there. I mean, I feel like that's like, I think Kimmy drove a car with like a white bar across, like back in like maybe 2007 or it may have even been like the early teens, like 2013, 14. I can't remember the year. But
Yeah.
I remember them having a little fleck of white behind the driver like that. This is much more prominent, of course. And of course, the wing is almost entirely white
Yeah.
on the top.
Yeah.
But the blue, I mean, we're talking about Ferrari. Like the car needs to be predominantly red. And I feel like it's red, but there's seemingly a lot of black and a lot of white.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm a purist. You know me. I'm a less is more. I mean, I'm dressed in all black today, Blake. So it's like, I just like uniform, and Ferrari, the whole car needs to be red, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like a move that kind of comes from like, okay, well, we have to change something or we have to do something different.
hmm
So
hmm
let's do this. You know,
Yeah, it's called Lewis Hamilton. That's different.
Lewis Hamilton's different, and like the like the brightness, like it's a darker red, right, than it had been the last couple of years. So I think that
Yeah,
alone,
it's
like,
almost like a Fiorano red as opposed to like a Scuderia red, which is that tinge of orange in it.
yes, yeah, there's much less orange in it. It's distinctive. Like you notice, I feel like you notice right
hmm
away, and then of course the big kind of pops of blue really
hmm
really really jump off of the car. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the other one that kind of like called out, and then of course like seeing it in the actual kind of different car as well.
hmm
I don't know if that's just subconsciously playing with it, um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean, at least look, if you look at like Red Bull, that livery has been the same for the last, you know, like forever,
Yeah.
pretty much. You know,
It's
it's
if it
it's
ain't
almost
broke, don't
become like
fix
where
it.
you just expect it to be exactly the same almost, and it's there's maybe like very slight variations
hmm
that happen, but I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be able to like spot the difference, right next to it. And I
Yeah.
was at the reveal of the livery 2 years ago when they did it in Manhattan. Is that 2 years, 3 years ago? And
Was that when they were on Fifth Avenue? Weren't they
it
like
was actually
driving
it was
across
over
Fifth?
by it was
Or was
over
it
by the
Broadway?
Hudson. It was over by where the Classic Car Club of Manhattan
Oh, okay, the
is.
West Side Freeway.
It was yep, it was over there that they did it. And of course, it's like a meme of itself at this point that it's going to be the exact
Right.
same thing. And then I was at an
Yeah.
event last year. I forget what it was in Manhattan where they had one of the cars there as well. and they did something creative, I think, where they were going to have like fans like submit like different special liveries that they were going to use throughout the season. And I think there was like three or four
Right.
of them,
Right.
which they ended up doing, I think for all but like one of them, because one of them it ended up like adding too much weight or something like that to the car.
Huh.
So I think this year the minimum weight went up by just a couple of kilograms to like 800 on the nose. And I think that's because of a new regulation that requires them to use a cooling system for the drivers
Right.
into the car. So
Yeah,
it
for
like
the heat.
accounts for that.
Yeah.
The battery that pumps the water into their suits or something like that. But yeah, largely the same all around. I think that the Mercedes car still kind of has those nice arrows that come up the back. I think this is still,
Yeah.
yeah, do you think that there's a different way that they could incorporate the Patronus green into the car than they have? I feel like this is like the other option to do something like that versus kind of having like a big stripe of white like the Ferrari does.
Right.
Um, where they have it kind of like defines the Coke bottle shape of things a little bit. But I think their livery looks about the same. looks about the same as well. Like I'd have to
Very
bring up
close.
last year's to kind of really, really kind of spot the difference to how they go. And I feel like theirs looks a little different depending on whether you're looking at it from the top down or like from the side.
Hmm.
Because like, from the side it looks like it's almost entirely black, but from the top down it looks almost entirely silver,
Yeah.
which feels very much
Yeah.
like by design, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. I mean, it's very modern, it's very sleek. I mean, I think if anything's ever painted in black, it's going to look super sleek, which I can appreciate.
Yeah.
And it's funny you brought up the weight thing. I think something that's like not really thought about, and if I'm not wrong, I think red and black are the heaviest weighted paints because I
Oh.
think that's why most airline aircraft are either silver or white because
Uh,
it's the lightest way and it's more fuel efficient. Obviously, you're pushing a lighter object through the air. So, I think that's why some people with private jets, like, Michael Jordan or Lewis Hamilton, have black jet. It's kind of a flex. Like, I'm going
uh,
to paint this jet with a super heavy color just to show you I got cash. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I hadn't considered that. And I wonder if like how they think about their weight allotment. Like I wonder if a certain weight allotment like has to be for the paint,
Yeah.
so that
No, I mean
teams
they have to.
like don't
I
just
mean,
like
you're talking about ounces, you know what I mean?
yeah, when it certainly obviously like adds up. And you look at like the Alpine team, which is like all like bright pink and blue, and
Mhm.
it looks like nice. It's got all the like flecks in it almost. It looks like whereas, if a team was going to make a decision to just like not paint the car at all, it would just like run it bare carbon and then just put the stickers of the sponsors on, like how much weight that would be. Like they must be mandated to paint the car and then you get a weight
Well,
allotment of paint, right?
I mean, I think so, but I think we're past paint in this category, aren't we? Aren't they wrapping these cars to where it's all just like the same 2-3 millimeter thick,
Like vinyl, like piece
polyvinyl
of
or
vinyl
yeah,
type
vinyl
thing.
wrap. Yeah. I mean, I would have to assume, I mean, obviously the graphics in and of themselves would also be higher resolution if you could print them, right? I mean, they're not like instead of stickers that you then have to do a clear coat over. But I could be,
Yeah.
this is a really interesting question. Now that we're speaking about liveries, is like, do these cars actually have paint on them or are they wrapped?
It's got like I feel like I wonder if there is a base paint and then there's like a wrap of the graphics that go over the paint.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the
Like a
individual
model decal.
sponsors are like
Yeah.
decal type situations because I feel like that is like subject to change throughout the year, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Whoever's listening, somebody DM us and tell us how these things are colored.
we need some knowledge. Yeah, we'll do some. We'll have to do some research to dig in here on this one as we get into the season. Hopefully we
Yeah.
don't have to spend too much time talking about the liveries as we get into the season. And spoiler alert, Wesley and I are maybe working on a little something that we'll do in partnership throughout this F1 season. So stay tuned for
Yep.
that. So yes, this will be the largest focus that we bring to the to the to
Well,
the
oh, and
liveries.
now that I think about it, even with these colors, some of them, or the cars, some of them are matte and some of them are more glossy. So
Yes.
that's another reason why I kind of feel like they must be wrapped. Because I mean, I think it's easiest to do a matte color with a wrap,
With a
right?
wrap, yeah, the Red Bull car is the first one that comes to my mind when I think of the wrapped matte kind of
I
texture.
think even the Ferrari last year,
And
I
the
think
Ferrari,
wasn't
yes,
that
because
one
those
matte?
two were the
Yeah.
easiest to photograph. Because the races that I've been at and you're trying to photograph these things, and they're going by a million miles an hour. It's really hard to like pan with them. So your camera has to be able
Mm-hmm.
to find focus like quick. And those
Yeah.
matte cars, it finds like fast. So I feel like all of the pictures of the matte cars are like a bit clearer, came out like a
More
bit better
crisp.
than all
Yeah.
of the others.
That makes
You
sense.
can like see more details. But I'm also excited to see what kind of special liveries come out this year on the cars. Of course, there's always a few races for each of the teams that they'll pick and do some kind of special livery. The McLaren, when it first tested this year, it already did some testing for their filming day, I think. At Silverstone, it had this like really cool orange and black camo situation that was going on.
Mm.
I'd love to see in stuff like that, and I love to see how creative the teams can get with some of these things. Like I mentioned, that turkey with the white Red Bull, like that still sticks out in my mind. So, I think when they can do that effectively, it's like a really special thing. Or the
Yeah.
Mercedes car in Miami, if you like for its first race, I think they had some like really cool kind of like rainbow type things going on the wings. It was just it adds like kind of a special detail, and it sticks out in your mind, and it makes it a little bit easier to like remember. Oh yeah, that race, and then you kind of remember like what happened because it was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. I love the idea of having kind of like the mule car, when you're like seeing the new, I don't know, Audi RS6 come out and they've got all these like pads all over
yeah,
the car so you don't know the actual contour.
yeah, but it
Um,
ends up looking
I
like
always,
badass.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely, it looks like a mule.
Yeah,
Like it's just all kind of, malaligned and misshaped and stuff. I think it's cool to then reveal it.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, definitely excited for the season. What else you got cooking today? I think you're going to an event later.
Yeah, so this is the other part of all these like liveries coming on is some of the watches that we're starting to see released around it. Of course, earlier this week, Mercedes released a new XPL shock absorber. Mercedes AMG X Toto Wolf. It had some real long name, but it's like matte black because it's ceratanium, which is awesome. I think we both are huge fans of ceratanium.
Yep.
And then the shock absorber itself inside of the case is done in the Patronus green colorway, which is really cool. You can kind of see the edges of it sticking out the side.
Mm-hmm.
It's a limited edition thing. It's a real kind of highly conceptual watch. And the kind of materials and technology that goes into making it's like shock resistant to like 30,000 Gs or something crazy like that. So it's like $100,000 watch. It's again very conceptual in nature. I think it's
Sure.
kind of meant to be like a engineering like showcase.
Mm-hmm.
I think it looks really cool. You know what I really love about it is the dial on it, like the hand design and like the design of the dial itself and the texture of the dial. I would love to see that brought into a different kind of watch that was more accessible. Like put it in a
Yeah.
Mark 20 or something. Like get the date out of there and put those hands on it, and I think it would be absolutely killer. And this thing, of course, was offered also on a strap that is Patronus green as well, so you could really kind of like take it to the nines. I think Toto was wearing it at the event last night.
Yeah. I
So
mean, I'm with you on the hands because they're basically the same as like the pilot hands. It's just they're all like they're skeletonized
yeah,
and then the outer edges of the top half of each hand is loomed, or it appears so. They're white. But yeah, to your point, it's very much I guess this is due to the shock absorption, but like that Patronus color that runs around the dial being round, but the like surrounds under it are almost kind of like a rounded corner square. So it really
yeah.
does give you this like geometric approach that no other IWC does.
Yeah, it's very unique, and that is the I think it's like bulk metallic glass or something like that. That's the shock absorber thing that like dissipates
Yeah.
with like a spring in it. Um,
So
and
cool.
how they design. I think it's just an overall really cool watch, and it looks like the business too.
Yeah.
Um, but
It's doing stuff.
it's doing stuff. Yes, it's got important people to see and places to be. But they also like formally released a new titanium Mark 20 with the Patronus green dial and a strap. Of course, they released the pilot's chronograph in the same configuration a
Hmm.
few years back at Miami. The watch is really cool, and the chronograph, I think titanium makes a lot of sense because it's a slightly bulkier watch. So the titanium, helps with a bit of that heft. So does the
Yep.
ceratanium for that matter, because the ceratanium
Sure.
feels like slightly lighter to me
Hmm.
than steel, so it makes it a little bit easier to wear. Like the Tribute to 3705, I think is a really easy watch to wear, as you know, and then of course the titanium version of this. But I would love to see more titanium Mark 20s, and this is one of two I think that exist in the current lineup. And if you like more pops of color like that, it's a fun watch. But
Yeah.
tonight I'm off to go see a new Gerard Perregaux that was just released. They're of course a partner of Aston Martin, and this is an Aston Martin edition Laureato chronograph. And this is also a titanium case, but the dial here is it's like iridescent green. So and it's got this kind of like it looks like maybe a rough texture. I'll be seeing it in the flesh here in just a couple of hours, so I can't speak to exactly what it looks like in person. But in pictures, it's really quite stunning. So I'm excited to see it. And of course, Aston Martin, I think, has this association with the color green, not only for like British racing green, but they have some very unique colorways that they do on their cars, and many of them incorporate green. So I think the whole idea was to get a very dynamic green dial here for this watch. It involves like 14 or 15 layers of paint that's like built up and baked at certain
Wow.
times, but it looks just incredible. And I think they a couple of years ago they did these ceramic green watches with Aston Martin as well that I thought were really great. They were also Laureatos. But this one I'm pretty excited to check out. I think it'll be really cool. What do you think of these watches?
I haven't seen too much of the Gerard Perregaux, but I did see the tag, the new F1s that have been obviously trickling in.
Yes, the Tag Heuer. So that's another thing. They are the official title sponsor of F1 as a whole this
Pretty
year.
exciting,
Yeah,
actually.
taking
Yeah.
over.
I mean,
So they had Domenico Stefanelli on the program last night, and usually he's in his Daytona with white tile. And this time he was in his Tag Heuer Monaco watch. So it was, it kind of made it official for the first time in my mind, like seeing that on his wrist. I was like, wow,
yeah.
it's really happening. We're going to see more LVMH involvement and in Tag Heuer in particular. So I imagine that they will have plenty of releases throughout the season, and I also imagine that we'll be seeing more of those like classic '90s F1 watch designs. We saw
Hmm.
them the Kith ones I think last year,
The
2 years
Kith
ago,
release, yeah.
and those are I think those were really popular. So I think we'll see more regular versions of those watches coming soon. And of course,
Yeah.
for LVMH Watch Week, they released a slew of new F1 watches as well that have kind of a slight cushion shaped case. Kind of unique
Hmm.
designs to them. And I'll leave links to all these watches down below so you'll be able to check them out. But it's that time of year. These are like expensive, important relationships for a lot of these watch brands to be seen. So it's kind of like figuring out, how do we best take advantage of it, and how do we release product? How do we activate product against it? And that I feel like changes almost from year to year. So you get the sense maybe that some brands are still kind of like actively figuring out like how to best approach these partnerships with in terms of like releasing product as well.
I was able to pull up that GP really quick, and it's almost got sort of like a sand texture on the dial, and
Yeah.
it's a very interesting green because I can guarantee you, almost having not seen it, of course, in person, but depending on the light, that green is either going to look like Kermit the Frog or it's going to look like deep, like a forest green. I have a feeling.
I feel like even like if you just the angle as it
Barely.
changes,
Yep.
I feel like would reflect light totally differently.
Yep.
So which could it looks really interesting. I don't know how it would be like in day to day where
Sure.
but it
Right.
seems like a highly dynamic dial, which is very much like a trend over the past few years, right?
Yep.
Even the IWC Ingenieur, when that came out with that teal dial, that has the same kind of like it really can look very different. Like the hue can look very different depending
Totally.
on the lighting and depending on the angle that you're viewing it at. Like I feel like that's a real thing that's happening now, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of brands are. Oris has even done iridescent dials and
Sure.
like
Yep.
exotic, like taking an exotic approach to a dial configuration is like a real like proving grounds right now for a lot of brands. I feel.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're speaking of something like an Ingeneur or something like that, where like it's for all intents and purposes a time only watch. It's like, what are the other ways that we could really make this design dynamic? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and like add value. And I feel like that is it's shifting
Mm-hmm.
a lot because like forged carbon and titanium that were not long ago kind of the realm of like the exotic watches. Now you can get that kind of stuff in watches for $1,000, under $1,000. So I think
Totally.
it's a different, customers are they're being exposed to this kind of thing and watches that are at these price points. So it's not like a brand can just get away with saying it's a forged carbon case, therefore it's a
Right.
$15,000 watch. Like I feel
Right.
like that's not going to cut it anymore because they can point to a dozen other examples all across the price spectrum that are also forged carbon. So it's like, well, where's the value? What am I actually getting here for my money that's different? And I think like materials like Ceratanium that are
Mm-hmm.
like purely proprietary to a brand.
Right.
And when you see Ceratanium, when you feel it, it's very unique, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's lightweight. It's like that has its own value proposition, I think. Um,
Totally.
but like the dials and how if they can manufacture them in ways that like nobody else can and they look like nothing else does, that's another way for a brand to build in like a lot of that like exotic, quote unquote value into a watch
Yep.
if they want to price it at a certain way. So brands that are looking to take some of these watches that are and sell them for 15, 20, $25,000, whatever, that's another way that they can put in something there that's like, look at this shiny thing, isn't it cool? When like just a base titanium Laureato, I Sharp Perigo is a premium brand, like they're a premium manufacturer, all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to take anything away from them. Like even without that dial, this is still like a pretty special watch. That dial just kind of like pushes it over the top. So um,
Sure.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's up to like the market to decide. Do we care about dials like this?
Right.
you know,
That's
or
fair.
is it kind of one of those things like if you got a car that was like had iridescent paint, would you be sick of it after like a month? you know?
Yeah, it's the Doug DeMuro take on deviated stitching for Porsche guys. Like, good for you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But like if this is a watch that you're gonna wear over the course of like years and years and years,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. Like you might get
Yeah.
sick of that color. I really don't know. I feel like Grand Seiko has a good approach because they kind of build in these textures and they integrate with these like kind of really subtle colors sometimes, and it's all like referential to their landscape, but it could mean a lot of different things. I don't know. Theirs feel like more unique to them versus just kind of
Mm-hmm.
purely like look at the texture and the colors that some brands that are doing this. I feel like some work and some don't. Largely just like these liveries, right? It's exactly
Yeah.
it's exactly the thing. But I really don't know where. Like, is it a passing fad? In a couple of years,
Mm.
it's going to be like, remember that time when brands would come out with these crazy looking dials, and now and then it would be kind of like weird to be seen with one because it's like era specific. I don't know how they're going to age, like how well they're going to age.
Yeah, I mean, you think of Rolex, with like the celebration dial or whatever that was called a couple years ago, and then like just changing colors, considering it a new model, and
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
And they've done
Oh,
that.
great, the Destro, like, okay,
Look, they've
fantastic. You
done
put
that in
the
the
crown on the
past.
left.
Do you remember Rolex dials? Maybe like 15 years ago, they would put the kind of like pattern of the word Rolex in like hologram
Oh
type
yeah,
style.
yeah. There was a blue dial even several like a few years ago
Like
that had that.
I don't I feel like that has maybe not aged so well, personally.
No,
Um, yeah, the celebration dial and then the one with like all the puzzle pieces. Yeah, I have no idea how
right.
in like 10
The
years
day
from
date.
now when you
Yeah,
look back at that, is it going to be like kind of cringy or is it going to be
I
like
can't
the
imagine
hot
they made a
stuff?
ton of them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. Just
Anyway,
like some of these
yeah, I don't
liveries
know.
that you look back. I mean, you look back at like the MP4 of like the 90s or something, and you're like, oh, that was classy. There's maybe just a
Yeah,
couple of sponsors on there or something, and you could have sponsors like Marlboro.
right.
It's just not the case anymore. It's like there's so many sponsors on some of these cars. It's just it's wild.
Well, I brought up basketball earlier. Now even NBA jerseys have sponsors on them.
Yeah.
And it's just like any way to make more money and all this stuff. It's just I get it. If you're sponsoring an F1 car, God knows you want your name present on the car so that people do understand it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's a lot like refrigerator magnets. It can be anyway.
Yes,
You know what I
it
mean?
kind of scatters the eye. I know, I know. But hey, like the line has to go up and to the right, so pack more of them on there, right?
That's
Especially
right.
with more of these high-profile events, like it's big. It's big time now. It's big
Yeah.
time. Well, that was our look. Kind of thoughts on the liveries. There, we're both on the same page, I think, with the
Visa
V
card
carb, Visa
or V Cob. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Racing Bulls, Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, whatever you want to call them. I love it, and that is the team that will feature one of 4, 5 rookies that will make their kind of like full time debut this year. So I'm really excited about the season. I think this we've had the last few seasons where it's a lot of the same kind of names coming in. So this is like the first year where it's a lot of new drivers that are coming in with a lot of like potential, a lot of hype behind some of these people. Kimi
Hmm.
Antonelli for Ferrari. I really hope that he is able to pan out. Colapinto, of course, showed flashes of brilliance last year. What's he going to be like? And it's the same with Oliver Behrman, who had some really high points in some of his appearances. What are these guys going to be like? These kids, really, going to be like
Yeah.
here across the course of a 24 race season? I mean, that's a long season. I don't know.
It's getting longer, and I feel like there's a lot of British drivers now, like more than ever
Dude,
before.
they've got the pipeline to bring these guys up and like train them
Yeah.
from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
If you got the money at least. I think
Yeah, totally.
so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's our thoughts on the livery. Any final words? Any team that you're like really excited to see this season? Do you have a
Well, I
team, or
mean,
are you kind of just like
yeah,
agnostic
no,
watching it?
no, 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 not at all. I'm definitely a Ferrari guy. Have always been a Ferrari guy,
Yeah,
and I think Schumacher and even earlier than that. Like I've always loved that red car, which is why I'm so beat up about that HP logo.
that HP logo and that white stripe down the middle. Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, obviously, it is kind of like NFL football in some ways. It's like who's your driver. It's not even who's your team anymore,
yeah,
And it's like I was a Kimmy fan forever, and
yeah,
he's gone, and Danny Rick, and now he's gone.
yeah.
It's like God only knows what's going to happen with him.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Those are two like a couple of like fan favorite faces from the sport that have been kind of
yeah.
like mainstays for such a long time that now
But I
we're
love I love Leclerc.
yeah,
I'm excited to see Lewis, obviously, in
yeah,
red. I mean, he's definitely living the dream. Who doesn't want to drive for Ferrari?
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I guess just as parting words, really, it's just kind of like to echo the tease from mid conversation. If anybody didn't hear Blake say that really quickly, because it came off the tongue rather fast. Yeah, we're hoping to make this a special little series this year. So those of you who are listening, please do stay tuned for that. The debate of how many of these we're going to do is still up in the air, and some other ancillary details. But do stay tuned, and we sincerely appreciate you listening.
yeah. Absolutely, I'm really excited to tackle it, and I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So,
All right, Blake. Well, we'll catch you soon.
all right, sounds good, Wes. Thank you for
Enjoy the
joining
event
me.
tonight.
Thank you, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. You can follow along on. Well, I guess if you're listening to this, it's probably tomorrow, but you can go follow the Deep Track or Blake Bettner on Instagram, and you can see some live pictures of this thing. While you're there, you can go follow Standard H as well. All right, Wesley, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, take care.
Ciao.